Hey everybody, happy Thursday. It is episode 20 already here of Sports Speak on August 20th. I'm Eddie Kalegi.
And I'm Tim Moore.
Lots to get to in an action-packed day and an action-packed week of sports. We've got Tim back. Raheel did a great job filling in for him on Monday. And I'm going to start things off with the NBA playoffs where we've seen some upsets. And I'm telling you, I'm not the type of person who wants to jump on bandwagons all the time, but I am hopping on the Dame train. The Portland Trailblazers taking out the Lakers in Game 1. They match up against them tonight in Game 2. The Lakers have a lot of holes since they came to the bubble. We knew anything was possible in the bubble, but I said on the show last week when we did our NBA playoff preview, watch the 3 and 4 seeds succeed the 1 and 2. Not saying they're going to lose, but they're going to struggle a little. And we're seeing that with the Lakers and Bucks. Clippers had all kinds of problems with Dallas last night. Even the Raptors haven't been able to get free of the Nets and have barely won both of those games. So, Tim, the Lakers and Bucks both in action tonight. Do you think either of them drop down 0-2?
I don't see the Bucks dropping down 0-2. It's definitely the Lakers, in my opinion, and not just because of the man's uniform that you're wearing right now. But, I mean, Damian Lillard has been unstoppable. The Lakers, the depth has always been a concern, which is a difference from them being a championship team and a team that gets eliminated, in the Western Conference Finals. Right now, they look like a team that's in full disarray. They have no idea what direction to go, and they have to put a lot of faith on LeBron James. And don't get me wrong, yes, you have Anthony Davis there, who is always consistently a star. But as we've proven from time and time, especially with the Golden State Warriors, one or two players doesn't necessarily win you a championship. You need a whole unit united. And you look at the opposite side right now for Portland. This is a team and a unit that has put together a good bubble run, has put together now a good first playoff game, and I expect them to continue that momentum. It really looks like right now the Blazers can't be stopped. And I'm not saying that the Lakers are going to lose the series. I could see the series going deeper. But if I'm LA, I'm a little bit worried right now because this Portland Trail Blazers team is coming with a purpose. And if you're not careful, you may get swept.
And the thing with Portland, too, you said playing with a purpose. I feel like there's a lot of, underhanded motivation that all these guys have. You think about, first off, Damian Lillard. I mean, I think now we recognize him as a star. But he's gotten 3 60-point games this season, and people don't seem to talk that much about him. People are more about the scorers like Harden and Curry, but Lillard is a good player. He's solid on defense, too. He's better on defense than Harden. I'll start with that. But, I feel like sometimes we start thinking about him, oh, yeah, he's a star, and then he just fades into oblivion again, maybe because Portland hasn't had the best seasons. I know they've had a couple clutch playoff runs, and then they don't really turn out or they get beaten by Golden State. But, hey, this team is really performing right now, and Lillard has shot up to center stage and has been the MVP of the bubble. Think about Carmelo Anthony. Now we've got Skinny Melo out there who is doing great, and he's trying to get a resurgence. We thought he was done 2 years ago after his time with Oklahoma City, and now he's back in the NBA. Jusuf Nurkic, who was, if we didn't have this postponement, would have missed the entire season. He's back, and he is dominating. I talked about this with Raheel on Monday. 17 rebounds in the first half on Saturday against Memphis. That is incredible. That's like Wilt Chamberlain numbers right there. And then even Coach Terry Stotts, who's a very underrated coach. He's a veteran in the basketball world. And he wants people to start to get to notice him. And overall, it's all coming together. Portland's got a good lineup. Gabriel, their power forward, a rookie from Kentucky. He's a fighter. He gets in there, and he really is able to get bodied around by Anthony Davis and JaVale McGee and really hold his own in there against the Lakers. So I still have faith in Portland that maybe they could pull off an upset. But I'm going to switch it over to their counterparts in the East, the Orlando Magic. And there's something that people keep forgetting about, and that's the comfort level there has to be for the Orlando players, because I know they're away from their families, but they're 10 minutes away from where they typically be. They're still in their main city. I know they're in the bubble, but it's much more of a comforting situation than being literally on the opposite end of the country from where you typically are. And credit to Steve Clifford, who always coaches some really solid defensive teams. Magic are without 2 of their starters. They lost Jonathan Isaac early in the bubble, and now Mo Bamba left the bubble for some post-coronavirus treatment. So they're without 2 starters. Aaron Gordon's been banged up, and you've seen guys like Gary Clark stepping up that you didn't really expect. Terrence Ross has been really good off the bench. They don't have a real true star. Maybe Gordon is the closest to that on that team, but they've got a nice mix of guys that can come together and can really complement against Milwaukee, especially if they can siphon Giannis out of the mix. And they did a good job with that with Vucevic on defense in Game 1.
Yeah, this Magic team, when they're put together and they're healthy, which right now they really aren't, can be a good team that as well could compete for a 5 seed in the regular season. But obviously, we know things didn't work out that way, and right now they're facing the Bucks. But what they need most importantly is what we saw in the game one, which you mentioned, is knocking down something Antetokounmpo and not allowing him to be in the game involved in every single aspect for the Bucks offense. And for the Bucks right now, there's no champion. Yes, they've done one on the series. But I think a lot of that struggling in game one, Hetty, has a lot to do with the fact that you have to remember the Bucks were resting their players throughout the majority of the bubble games. Not saying that that's the reason why they lost, but you look at it, these players still have to get back in the rhythm. Sure, they've had practice and they've had a couple of weeks, limited minutes, coming out and playing on the floor. But either way, in 8 games, for most players, still isn't necessarily enough to fully get into a rhythm, especially after taking months off of basketball at one time. I think you can see the Bucks turn around and play a much better all-around game. But the question is, again, how does Orlando stop Giannis? And if they do, how are they going to be productive offensively? Because the one, I guess you could take that take Orlando, and this has really not just been this year, but over the past few years, especially before COVID, they come out and they play a big basketball game against a good basketball team, and then they come out the following game, and their offense just goes missing. I think the Magic need to find offensive consistency, and overall, and I know defense wins championships, I don't think defense is the question for the Magic, with the exception of can you stop Giannis, but how do you make every single possession matter on the floor against a team that you know is going to score a lot of points?
And they did a good job of that in Game 1. I mean, they put up 120 against a Bucks defense that people consider as one of the best in the NBA. And this is going to lead right into our SEC recaps of the week. And I'm going to start with mine. I'm going to start with my surprise. And it's going to go away from the NBA. I'm going to go with baseball. We talked about this with Raheel on Monday, that the Tampa Bay Rays really seemed to have the Yankees' number early on in the season. Zach Britton struggled. They couldn't hold on for Garrett Cole. There was also a lot of debate about taking Garrett Cole out of the game yesterday. But the Rays take the victory 4-2 and sit just a half game back at the Yankees. I thought the Yankees were going to have the upper edge on the Rays, especially since the Rays early on in the year, they have almost a completely different lineup from last season. You think about Susugo coming in there. They've got a lot of different names, Mike Brasso, but they've all come together, mixed together well, and they've really melded together this lineup really early in the season, and they're firing on all cylinders right now. So really nice to see for the Rays. So that's my surprise, because I thought the Yankees would at least have their number in the regular season, and maybe the postseason would be a little different. My thing that happened that was expected, I'm going to go with the Boston Celtics, who are up 2-0, have blown out the 76ers in both games so far. We knew without Simmons was going to be a big, tough situation for the Sixers. Joel Embiid has not actually been getting the ball that much on offense, which has drawn the criticism of a lot of people, and many questioning if the Sixers do get swept, is this the end of Brett Brown as coach? And my conclusion, we're going to get into NASCAR at the end of the show, but the Daytona Road Course, I think, was a success. I know the Cup race didn't have as much, people thought had too high of expectations, that it was going to be like that Charlotte Roval race where just chaos, everybody slamming into barriers. Other than the Harvick spin off the restart, there wasn't much chaos in this race, and then Kyle Busch having all kinds of car problems. But it was still a good fight to the end, and if Denny Hamlin had about 2 more corners, he would have gotten Chase Elliott. Nice to see Chase continue to succeed at the road courses. Nice to see guys like Chris Buescher and Jimmy Johnson, who have both just had awful luck this season, both finished in the top 5. But I think the Daytona Road Course could be here to stay in at least some facet in the future, more so than just the Clash.
Yeah, and before I give my SEC, I think that's a big concept that we'll talk about later. But I think that race in particular is huge for Jimmy Johnson, for example, because he's so many points outside of the cut line, which these next three races are going to be interesting. And I think the road course really did a good job of setting that up because we didn't know what to expect. But I want to start off with my S. And I'll tell you what, we talked about a few podcasts ago about the NHL playoffs in which two teams that were down 2-0 in their first series, would they have the chance of coming back? And that was the Chicago Blackhawks. Well, they turned around, they won the first series. Now, obviously, we know they lost to Vegas. I believe it was last night, if I'm not mistaken.
Mhm.
But my biggest surprise was that they actually took a game from the Golden Knights, let alone, losing in 5 games. I didn't think Chicago had anything. But to be honest, the first 3 games of the series, they played close and competitive. I didn't expect it at all. Yes, their season's done now, and, Las Vegas walks away with the victory. But give them a lot of credit. I thought the Golden Knights were going to blow them away. And sure, in a series number, yes, they won it 4-1. But to me, that was a big surprise because I expected that door to be completely blown open. My E, we're going to go back to the NBA here, Donovan Mitchell. That was expected when it comes to the playoffs. Look what he's done the first 2 games, 57 points, 3rd highest in NBA history in the playoffs. And he turns around and puts together a 30-point performance against the Denver Nuggets in Game 2. I'll tell you what, the Jazz blew a 20-point lead in Game 1. They turned around, played a great basketball game yesterday. And by the way, they get Mike Conley back potentially for Game 3. But Donovan Mitchell, when it comes to big games, it's not anything shy of expected. He comes up in a clutch, just like Damian Lillard. And I know Donovan's farther from an MVP bubble, or I should say the bubble of the MVP. But like Damian Lillard, when games start to matter, Donovan comes up big with shots, and he's proven it through these first 2 games in a big series against a team that traded him away after drafting him. And in conclusion, I'll tell you one, sticking on the NBA topic, don't expect anything. The series that we're seeing now here, just in the first round, Toronto may be up 2-0, for example. But guess what? They may lose the next 2 games. There is no idea in what to expect. At first, Eddie, to be honest, I thought we were going to see a couple 4-0 sweeps. But now I wouldn't be surprised if we see 2 or 3 7-game series at this point, because I have no idea what to expect for the NBA playoffs, and it's been making really good TV.
Yeah. Like the NBA playoffs too, people are saying the big difference is that there's no home court advantage. And at first people were saying, it would balance out because nobody's home. But I think this is actually helping like the 7 or the 8 seeds, because think about it. Like if the Portland had to go into Staples Center and deal with that raucous Lakers crowd, that would be a difficult task. We know how raucous the Raptors fan base is, and the Nets going into Toronto, I think that would be a challenge. But the fact that it's just completely neutral, it's giving these teams an opportunity to really battle it out. And remember, these rosters aren't exactly the same from the actual season. We saw guys get signed. We saw guys opt out. So what we saw in the regular season doesn't necessarily translate here. Think about the Raptors and the Nets. The Raptors dominated Brooklyn during the regular season. I know they've won both games here, but they blew a 33-point lead and the Nets cut it to 7 in Game 1. And the Nets they were 1 3-pointer away from tying that up and forcing overtime in Game 2. Also, Utah and Denver, which, by the way, I think that's the most entertaining of the 8 series, because those 2 teams are so evenly matched. They both have a great center in Jokic and Gobert. They both have a great guard in Donovan Mitchell and Murray. And they both have these coaches like Mike Malone and Quinn Snyder who, unlike other coaches, they do a good job of mixing together old school and new school. Yes, they run the pick and roll and getting the guard in the 2-man game with the guard feeding to the center, but they also are able to mix it up. They mix in the 3-pointers so they can keep up with the rest of the Western Conference, and I really like that coaching philosophy. But back to the original point, Utah was crushed by Denver in the regular season. All 4 games, they lost by double digits, and now they're coming back. Actually, the first 3 games, my bad. And then the 4th game was in the bubble, and that one went to double overtime. But they're fighting hard, and they're doing a great job. And 1-1 in that series, also 1-1 in the Clipper-Dallas series. The West could have a lot of surprises going forwards, but I'm going to turn over to baseball now, because there's been 2 things this week in baseball that have really, gone over everything that's actually happened in the game. We'll get to Thom Brennaman in a minute, but I'm going to start with the thing that happened first, and this was Monday night in Texas, where the Padres were leading the Rangers 10-3 in, I believe, the 8th inning, and Fernando Tatis Jr. stepped up with the bases loaded, a 3-0 count, and there's something that people forget. Jace Tingler, the new manager of the Padres, gave him the signal to take the pitch. Tatis instead swings, hits a grand slam, 14-3, and he's got the major league lead in home runs and RBI. Now, this has drawn all kinds of criticism because the vast majority of the media and the fan base are in support of Fernando Tatis Jr. because, you know what, let the kids play. That was always the motto for baseball. He's trying to make his season great. As Johnny Bench, a Hall of Fame catcher, one of the great home run hitters of the 1960s and 70s, said, grand slams are not an easy feat to come by, so you take them when you get the opportunity. Even pitchers. We saw Trevor Bauer, who, he's always got a lot of opinions. He was in support of Tatis Jr. Because you know what? If it's 3-0, you make a better pitch, and that's what we've seen some other pitchers. But we have seen some people, Christopher Russo, Keith Hernandez, who were not necessarily in support of Tatis. So let me give my 2 cents, and then I'll let you add on here. I have a problem with Tatis ignoring his manager's signal because I think that sets a bad precedent with that team because you've got an inexperienced person who's never managed in the major leagues before. If you've got, these players that are kind of taking it autonomously and ignoring what the manager says, that could be setting a bad precedent for what we could see going forwards with the Padres, who are in the midst of a rebuilding team, but we also know they have a lot of personalities on that team, like Manny Machado and Chris Paddock. That being said, I still think on a 3-0 count, you should be swinging in that opportunity. Tatis is trying to win an NL MVP, which is a prestigious honor. He's right in the mix. He's now got 12 home runs, 28 RBI, leads the NL in both categories, and he's trying to add on. And 10-3, I know it was a 7-run game. It wasn't a 15-run game. There's still the opportunity. Trust me, as a Mets fan, I have seen things like that. It was a year to the date of when the Mets had a 10-4 lead in the bottom of the 9th inning and lost in Washington. So you never know what can happen. As John Sterling always says, you can never predict baseball. And that's why I agree that Tatis had the right to do something like that. But that being said, my problem is not with the act. My problem was with him ignoring Jace Tingler's signal. That I think that could, lead to some problems in the major leagues and with the San Diego Padres going forwards. But I have no problem with him swinging and hitting the grand slam. Tim, what about you?
I'm going to have to agree in that regard where I just don't think there should be a problem with a hitter swinging at a 3-0 count. Listen, you loaded up the bases. That's your fault. At the end of the day, it's not – I understand if you're a baseball player and say, all right, stop stealing bases. Stop advancing on wild pitches. But it's a 7-run game. Anyone, and I mean anyone, could come back. And it wasn't like there wasn't innings left. This wasn't like this wasn't the bottom, or I should say top of the 9th inning. We're talking a game that still has 3 innings left, and anything could happen. And in fact, for a brief moment, Eddie, it almost felt like Texas had an opportunity really to come back in that game. But obviously, we know they didn't. They ended up losing by, I believe it was 10 runs, if I'm not mistaken. But ultimately, you can't bash this kid. He's chasing for an MVP, as you also mentioned, Eddie. But I think the most important thing as well is that what precedent are you sending by telling a kid that he's wrong for swinging at a good pitch and hitting a home run, for doing his job? I mean, to me, that's insane. He gets paid the big bucks to swing the bat, be the best baseball player he can be, and you're going to tell him that he has to take a pitch just to be a good player, just so that the pitcher can try to turn around and get him out? To me, it's just not – that's not the way you play baseball. You come out and you give 100% every single time. And if you don't, guess what? You don't play Major League Baseball, and you get cut. Unless you're Manny Machado, of course, but that's a different story. But overall, the way you look at it is that you have to give your all. I understand, and I took the coach ethics class and such as well, Eddie, where I can understand as a coach, all right, you slow down the pace, you have control, you be respectful to your opponents. But as for baseball, there's many different ways to be respectful to your opponents. I understand maybe he's disrespectful that he's swinging a 3-0 fastball directly down the plate, but that's like the 10th or 11th worst thing you can do. I mean, okay, let's play this. If there was no one on, you shouldn't back my opinion. But the bases are loaded. Let's say if that pitch was a ball and he swung at it. Guess what? He kept the at-bat alive. So he would have walked in a run anyways. The damage would have been done regardless. To me, I think the situation is completely blown out of proportion. Now, you also mentioned something as well where a little bit of a respect thing that he missed the take sign. I don't think in that scenario there should be even a take sign given, if I'm just being honest. You're up 7 runs.
I'm not against control. Yeah, I'm not against him swinging. My problem, and I agree with you. I don't think there should have been a take sign there. I think the whole unwritten rules. I think there's a lot of stupid unwritten rules in baseball from that. Or I think if you're shifted, I think you should be able to bunt down the third base line and try to get on base. I think those rules are stupid. My concern is that you've got younger players with the Padres, and you've got guys like Manny Machado who that personality heads there, and Chris Paddock that. You wonder if Tatis Jr. starting, ignoring his young, new, inexperienced manager, if that's going to be a problem. I disagree with the take sign, but you know what? I mean, you're still playing for a team, and you're also your manager is the person who's calling the shots during the game.
No, I mean, yes, your manager is the one that's calling the shots during the game, but the realism is your manager isn't the third base coach. So at the end of the day, Tatis is the professional. Guess what? He makes more money at the end of the day. I mean, not right now because he's young, but at the end of the day, when it comes free agency, he's going to make a whole lot more money than his manager does too. And I understand respecting it and calling the shots and such, but realistically in that situation, that's not a matter of a respect thing. His coach turned around and basically burned him. If you really do think about it, he didn't have his back. You're supposed to be a manager, right? You're supposed to have your players' backs. And at the end of the day, listen, you look at guys like Aaron Boone. Aaron Boone, don't get me wrong, makes boneheaded decisions with pitching. But if he makes a terrible decision, he'll be the first one to back up his pitchers, guys. Same thing as well as classical guys like, Terry Francona, or even, you look around. I mean, even on the opposite side, for the Washington Nationals, for example, where you have guys that, have grown up playing classical baseball, for example, Howie Kendrick, but they understand the new era to an extent. And I think this is what we're starting to see, Eddie, is the realism of new era baseball. And if you're a coach that can't adapt to new baseball, it's going to be a struggle. And that's the reason why San Diego over the years has really struggled to an extent. And I think the fact that you're not backing up your young superstar for doing his job correctly just looks wrong. And again, I understand it's a respect thing, but I don't see how that's so disrespectful. I can understand if, hey, he didn't run it out or if he made a mental mistake. But there's no mental mistakes hitting a grand slam home run on a 3-0 count. That's the man doing his job to his best ability. So to me, I just don't see it as disrespectful. And if anything, I hope the situation gets, a little bit out of the media aspect and a little bit no longer blown over, because this is just a simple overreaction. And if he gets hit for it, let me tell you something. You thought Joe Kelly was bad getting 8 games for missing a guy twice? Whoever hits him should be suspended, because to me, they look like the biggest baby on the block.
Well, they did suspend the pitcher of Gobats for Texas for a couple of games because after Tatis's home run, he plunked, I think, Machado, the next guy in the order. So, and then Chris Woodward also got a 1-game suspension that he served on Tuesday night. So Tatis hasn't gotten hit in the last couple of days. But
if I'm not mistaken, he threw behind Machado. He didn't actually hit him.
Yeah, you're right, behind Machado. But you did mention one thing. That, this has been an overreaction. We're seeing Hall of Famers chiming in with all different views. And, it'll move out of the media scene. And it did after last night, because another thing that was a little bit bigger of an issue actually happened. Thom Brennaman, who's been the longtime announcer for the Cincinnati Reds on TV, he's also worked on Fox and was like the number 2 announcer for football on Fox said a gay slur during the broadcast. He didn't realize he was on the air. It was in the midst of the doubleheader. It was right between the two games, between the Reds and Royals. And he ended up apologizing in the fifth inning during a Nick Castellanos home run and was then removed from the air. And the Reds have suspended him, and we don't know really what's going to come from this. Now, obviously, he should have been suspended, and I am 100% in agreement with that. And I find it a big problem, too, that, you know what? You should be proud. As an aspiring broadcaster, you should be proud of having your position and being able to do what you love for so many years. And to risk it by saying stupid stuff with your directors or whatever and not knowing you're on the air, to me, that's just a risk that should not be taken. That being said, he said something very offensive and is getting the punishment he deserves. Now, I was watching First Take today, and Stephen A. Smith and Max Kellerman, who usually have some pretty strong opinions on these types of things, they've said that they do not think he should be fired over this, that he should be suspended, but we should hear more from him. Because think about the thing with Deshaun Jackson a couple months ago, that the whole anti-Semitic post that he made, and then he visited the Jewish History Museum with Julian Edelman, and that's kind of, fallen out of the media talk right now, and he understands that he made a mistake. And Thom Brennaman's apology was a little weird in some points because he was trying to some of the way he phrased the apology, it was more so that like, hey, I am a good guy. I have other people who can back me up for it. That's really not what you're supposed to do in an apology, but it was sincere enough to make it think, you know what, this was a slip up. You suspend him for the rest of the season, but maybe he can, prove that he is, quote unquote woke and is aware of how that word that he used could be taken as offensive by people in the LGBT community, and maybe can come back in some facet in 2021. Because it's for us, I know he deserves to be punished for this, but it's frustrating for someone who has such a long career in the world of broadcasting to see it all go away by cancel culture so quickly. And, sometimes cancel culture is the right thing to do. I actually agreed with what Max Kellerman said, that if it's a repeated pattern of someone being offensive, that, cancel culture sometimes is good, but when it's just a one-time mistake, and, as both NASCAR fans, we can kind of compare this to Kyle Larson, because there's a lot of people saying he's not inherently a racist. He made a slip-up, and it was very similar to what happened with Thom Brennaman, and now we're hearing that he's been applying for reinstatement in NASCAR, and frankly, I think at some point they're going to give it to him. So, I don't think he should be fired over this. He should be suspended. He should be punished. And you know what? Frankly, he should be embarrassed for doing this. But I don't think this is something that should just destroy his career, because it's something that's happened once in 30 years. He's a good broadcaster. And frankly, I don't think he meant exactly everything that he said. Maybe he did. And if he did and they proved that, then he should not be there. But if this was just something he said as a joke, and then, it was proven that, he's not like anti-gay or whatever, that, maybe he could come back next year or a year after that.
Well, and I will say, based upon when I went back and watched the video yesterday, I'm interested to hear if more news comes out about the context of what happened prior to that, because to me, that almost seemed like a thing between him and his director in his ear, in which they were making somewhat of a joke. And obviously, I know the situation isn't a joke, but that's just kind of the way it came off before they started the pregame show. Now, I am going to say this, listen, mistakes happen. Everyone makes a mistake. You and I aren't perfect. No one is perfect. A lot of people have said stuff over the time. What he said, and I agree, he should get suspended for. But I 100% agree with you. The man's career shouldn't be ended just because of, something that he said and he is respectfully so ashamed of. He came on and apologized. Listen, not a lot of people, especially gutsy move by Fox, might I mind you, would come out after making something, know they did something wrong, come off the air, and then on that same day come back with a sincere apology. People will just take right to social media. People will do it a totally different direction. But yet he came on because he was that sincere about it. And sure, I guess you could say his situation is sketchy in the way how he backed it up is that he has people that can back him, that he isn't this way. And I understand that's, somewhat your initial reaction to prove that. But like the Deshaun thing, that's the reason why, too, I do agree with Stephen A. Smith in that regard, Eddie, that like the Deshaun Jackson thing, you can turn around. He's going to probably have to take something called sensitivity training first, and then put him involved in a bunch of other things to make him understand more of why his statement may have been offensive. And listen, this is going to be a mistake that doesn't happen again. People slip up from time to time. It's just what happened. To me, based on the context, it came off as a joke. And I understand, again, it's 100% offensive to people that especially have to deal with that on a regular basis. But I think it's just the way right now in the type of world we live in where, hey, if you or I say something even offensive right here on this podcast, it could be even, and I'm not saying his statement wasn't taken out of context, but the simplest of things can be taken out of context or misinterpreted to a different extent and can ultimately hold you liable. He needs to be held liable for the regards of what he said. But obviously in regards, it shouldn't be career ending. To me, that I feel that he's a good person deep down. He's been, as you mentioned, 30 years in the business, and this is his first slip up. People were bound to mistakes one time, and again, that's no justification, but I would like to see him come back eventually. I don't know if 2020 is the proper, the proper time to let him come back. 2021 probably, but listen, people make mistakes, and I'm able to forgive that. I know I don't walk in those shoes, and I'm not in that situation compared to, people that may be upset about the situation. But I think down the road, especially if he takes the proper steps in treatment, he can definitely be forgiven.
And yeah, you mentioned Stephen A. Smith, and he said something interesting, that what they did with Deshaun Jackson, instead of cancel culture, counsel culture, where you turn it into a learning experience. And, if he became active and was involved in things that supported the LGBT community, then this mistake would be forgotten. And he would be able to have the opportunity to come back and do what he loves. And like you said, he'll never make this mistake again. He'll know that he's done this once. This is not something he'd do repeatedly. And personally, I don't think this is something that had any sort of intent. But what I wonder is, we're still early into this, and this only happened. We're recording this at 1:30 today. This was only about 15 hours ago. That, what actually went down? What caused him to say this? Who else was involved in this conversation? What else was said? Because what the Reds said was about evaluation of their entire broadcast team, because they have to take into consideration, was the director saying something? Was his other analyst, was Jim Day making any sort of comment? And then this is the one that went onto the air. We don't know. So that's why this is still largely speculatory in some ways. But what we do know is that Thom Brennaman said a gay slur on the air, did not realize his mic was hot, and ended up apologizing, and has been suspended indefinitely from Cincinnati Reds broadcasts. So those are the two things that have really, gone over the actual action in baseball these past few days. But a couple things before we get to the racing side of things that I do want to say about baseball. One, the New York Mets are a mess with their rotation, but their offense is starting to get into the swing of things. 3 straight days with wins against the Marlins. Jacob deGrom was healthy again and came back and was solid for 6 scoreless last night. Bullpen was a little sketchy, but Michael Conforto came up clutch. Dominic Smith is hitting. Cano and Alonso are now really hitting well. McNeil is back after his injury. So they've got the lineup syncing together. Now they're just 2 below 500. So that's one thing I want to mention. Second thing, the Los Angeles Dodgers have won 7 out of 8. They lost yesterday against Seattle, but everything seems to be clicking. They also have a depleted rotation, but are still doing well nonetheless, and Mookie Betts is fitting in there really well. And with San Diego and Colorado both having really good years, and Arizona on the uptick, the Dodgers really have to keep the intensity on to make sure they win the NL West. And third and final thing in baseball is the Cleveland Indians are still doing really well, even though 2 of their pitchers, Zach Plesac and Mike Clevenger, are not there after violating COVID guidelines and going out to party after one of the games. Adam Savali last night pitched a complete game, and the Indians took down Pittsburgh. So those are 3 teams that are really impressing me right now.
Yeah, the way I look at it, Eddie, right now in this particular moment is that there's teams that really started off slow in this bubble and have really started picking up. And you mentioned the Mets. I mean, right now, yes, 2 games below 500, for example, but they're starting to play baseball that we knew this team could have, especially last season. And I think the big thing as well for the Mets is, all right, well, once they figured out the bullpen issues, how are we going to turn around and win every game? Now, I know the closer role isn't necessarily still 100%, I guess you could say, filled in regards to that Lugo's now, I believe, lost 2 games in the past week and a half, but he has made some big saves
He's
here.
also going into the rotation. Let me just say that. He's starting tonight over Steven Matz. They're sticking Matz in the bullpen.
Oh boy, I have to look at my fantasy team. I didn't know that. So that is huge. But I mean, again, that's an interesting concept that 60 games doesn't really, in the past with 162, didn't necessarily bring up that opportunity because you can expand and go to the minor leagues and such. Now that's a huge opportunity for the Mets, to try a couple of things and make up a couple of games. Being only 2.5 back after I believe they were at one point, if I'm not mistaken, it was 5.5 or 6 back to turn it around and make a run. This is starting to look good. And we know Miami started off great, but we knew they weren't that good. They couldn't keep up the momentum for that well. And Philadelphia, it seems like they split every other game, but the Mets have huge potential. And the Braves, to be honest, they've been very underwhelming to open up the year. I thought they were going to be a lot better. But the teams that have surprised me in the past few weeks, Eddie, I do want to start with the Brewers. The Brewers have done a very good job getting better. It seems like that offense is starting to click, and the pitching staff has calmed down a little bit. They're now back to 500, 11-11, sit second in that NL Central. They don't have anything for the Cubbies still, in my opinion, but basically knowing the Chicago Cubs and what David Ross has to manage is the fact that they can't slow down come the end of the year. That's the big reason why the Brewers made a push at them, if I'm not mistaken, maybe it was last year or the year prior for that NL Central title because Chicago just kind of faded away. I think it's important for Milwaukee to continue that momentum. The Cardinals, whenever they play baseball, they seem to be solid, but right now 6 and 7, they have a lot of games to make up. I'm eager to see how that process works because after you miss some time, I was worried, for example, about the Yankees even missing 3 days. Turns out it helped them at the time. Now every single one on the roster is hurt, but it could be your best friend like it was for the Miami Marlins, or it could be your biggest enemy. But the second one, and you mentioned them as well, the Dodgers. I mean, incredible. 18-8. The offense has finally put it together. That pitching staff, as we know, always good. They're dominating that NL West right now. And I know the Rockies and the Padres are having incredible years, but the Dodgers have always been good in the first 60 games. And I'm just so excited to see this team continue to push because let's be honest. I mean, I think you and I can both agree on this. They're going to be World Series favorites on the NL West side, or I should say the NL side. And unless they get, knocked down by one of their NL West rivals come playoff time, I think this is a team that you have to look for along with the Cubs to maybe make the World Series.
Yeah, I mean, don't count down the Dodgers because just because they had that slow start to the season does not mean they're a bad team. And we know how hungry they are. And the last few years have been frustrating. And, 17 and 18, they lost to teams that were potentially cheating. So, there's frustration building in that Dodgers team. So we're almost halfway through the baseball season somehow already. We're coming up on a month since opening day, and we've only got a little more than a month to go. Crazy how quickly it's going. But going to turn to racing to finish things off today. You weren't here on Monday, so I waited till today to get into the Daytona Road Course, where we saw 4 very different races between ARCA, Truck, Xfinity, and Cup. Xfinity probably had the most chaos. Cup might have had the most exciting finish. ARCA was at night, and Trucks just had a lot of guys who did not know how to drive a road course. But fact of the matter is, Chase Elliott back to victory lane in the Cup Series. 4 of his 8 career wins now have come at road courses. I mean, there's been the long debate now between Elliott and Truex, who's the best road course driver, and I think Chase has kind of nudged himself ahead in that category.
Yeah, I have to agree. I mean, the way you look at it for Chase Elliott has been incredible. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, this is his 3rd consecutive road course win now. So it's incredible what Chase has been able to do. And he's really become a front runner. And let's be honest, after the Xfinity race, I was a little bit worried about how Daytona, especially with splitters being on the Cup cars, would have ended up resulting. But it created a very good race. So, sure, we saw a couple of things like Kyle Busch's day going down the hill incredibly quickly, but we got to see good racing. And Chase Elliott, when it matters, he can really race. And that Daytona Road Course, that's a special win for him, obviously, because Daytona in general, anytime you pick up a win, no matter which course it is, it's huge. But he picked up that speed there towards the end of the race, and I know Denny Hamlin was flying, and he could have had a chance to win. But this continues every single week, Eddie, in my opinion, to continue to shade what you would like to imagine the Final Four is going to be. Chase Elliott, Kevin Harvick, Denny Hamlin, and then whoever your fourth surprise driver is. Because I would like to say it's going to be Kyle Busch, but who knows? Kyle Busch is falling apart right now. It could be anyone at this point, but you'd like to say those are going to be your three favorites to win the championship this year. And that's really the first time you can mention Chase Elliott overall as a favorite to win a championship.
I really don't see Kyle Busch in the Final Four, just being honest here. I think that fourth guy, I think it could be any of the three Penske cars because they've all been solid, or Martin Truex Jr., who I know he only has one win this season, but he's getting on a good stretch. He's had a bunch of good finishes in a row, and the playoff tracks are his best tracks. So there's still an opportunity, and he always seems to kick it into high gear in the postseason. Think about 2015. Driving for Furniture Row. He wasn't the most dominant guy, but he was able to sneak into the Final Four and fight for that championship with Busch and Gordon and Harvick. And, here we are once again with Truex now in a spot where he really wants to perform. And, since now he actually has teammates, he has the motivation to try to be the best JGR car. And he wants to try to keep up with Hamlin. And these last couple of weeks he actually has. And he's kind of passed over Kyle Busch. But looking at the Daytona Road Course itself, like you said about Chase Elliott's performance, but looking at the track itself, it was much more normal than people thought. People thought it was going to be crazy and everything, but think about it. The Charlotte Roval didn't exist until a few months before. Then, some NASCAR fans will think the Daytona Road Course is brand new. No, it's not. It's been used for the 24 hours for years. And I know they added in a couple chicanes, so there wouldn't be too much speed built up into turn one. But still, this is not a new track. It's just new to NASCAR. And we've seen drivers, including Denny Hamlin, who has said he wants to see this as a date on the schedule again. Maybe they can go to Daytona 3 times. And, the teams based in North Carolina would love that on the travel aspects if they eliminate a farther away race and stay in the Florida area for 3 races, especially still with the pandemic looming. We still don't know exactly how the 2021 schedule will shape up and what travel will look like and what the fan situation will look like across the country. So for now, I think it's a viable option for the future. I want to see Sonoma and Watkins Glen Black because I love those tracks first and foremost. But, the Daytona Road Course really supplemented that. It was nice to see the trucks get a road course race in, even despite everything going on. And getting to see the Xfinity cars once again on the road course. And how about Austin Cindric now? 5 out of 6 wins. He's really putting himself in a good spot to maybe get a cup ride next season. But regardless, I think it was a good track. And I think it should be here to stay in, facets more than just, being used for the Clash.
Yeah, I think that the Clash aspect of it was, that nostalgia effect that, hey, we get to see these guys on a road course to open up the year, something that we've never seen before in regards to opening up the season at Daytona. Now, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, years ago, NASCAR did an exhibition event. I think it was in Japan in regards to a road course before they opened up the year. I think Dale Earnhardt won that race, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, I think that was in like the 90s. And
90, yes. When regards to right before Speed Weeks, never. And if I'm not mistaken, is the Clash supposed to be under the lights?
I think they're moving it back to night, so it would be a night race on the road course.
So that's still going to be a first regardless. Obviously, these guys have gotten to do the road course during the day. But, to me, that's still big. But I would like to see this track on schedule still. I think that, at first, really, I wasn't a big aspect and fan of, road racing being on the schedule for NASCAR more than 2 races in the Cup schedule. But I've been having a lot of fun seeing these road races of late. And sure, don't get me wrong, Chase Elliott's won the last 3. But you look at the Xfinity races, for example, and they have about what I think it's like 5 a year between Mid Ohio, Road America, now Daytona, and such shorts, and they don't even go to Sonoma. So I would like to even see them add on Sonoma, but I think the tracks have become so entertaining. The racing, the passing, it's been so fun to watch. It's an aspect that NASCAR has been missing for a little bit. And I'm not saying, hey, go to majority road races, but it has made things incredible. So I do hope the Daytona Road Course does stay, and I hope it gets added onto a schedule. But what I think is most interesting, and I mentioned in the top of the podcast, Eddie, as well, when we were talking through our SECs, is that this race in particular really sets the tone now for the next 3. Because you look at it with Daytona coming up as the overall final regular season event, that's going to be huge because we already know nothing is going to happen. Or I should say, correction, not nothing's going to happen, but we don't know what's going to happen. You look at these next 2 races, this is a big opportunity for drivers to make up points, especially on the same weekend. If you have a good car going into the race come Saturday, you're going to come out Sunday feeling pretty confident that you're going to get another good result. And I think we're going to see a really tight battle for Daytona for that final cut line spot. Or maybe we'll see a surprise winner that'll find themselves in the chase that we had no idea was going to be there.
I know. I love the fact that Daytona is the regular season finale because it adds in so much drama with this system. And these Dover races, people always say Dover's boring, but think about it. These 2 races, these guys are going to want to be racing hard to get in the best position possible. So there's no uncertainty heading into Daytona because, it's unpredictable there. You could get wiped out in a crash on the first lap and that would be it. So that's something to consider. But you mentioned, I just want to say one more thing about the road courses, and then there's 2 more racing things I want to get to before we wrap up. With in regards to the road courses, the other thing that's kind of nice to see, it's not in the Cup Series, but in the Xfinity Series, we had kind of gone away from seeing a lot of road course ringers on the track, but we're starting to see it again, especially in the Xfinity Series this year. Thinking about Earl Bamber, but now I'm forgetting names. Preston Pardue. We've seen Josh Bilicki doing well. Andy Lally is back. Now, I don't know if we're really going to see road course ringers return to the Cup Series with the whole charter system, but it's nice to at least see them in the Xfinity Series. And despite driving for underfunded teams like Andy Lally, driving for a small team and running in a top 5 car, it's nice to see road course ringers sort of coming back in that facet.
Well, I think it is good to see them coming back in a certain facet, but I think the most important thing to remember is that these quote-unquote road course ringers are almost a thing of the past, to say the least, in regards to who's going to come out and dominate the race. Because you see now drivers say for NASCAR, they're so good overall at what they do. And I think Kyle Busch turned around and proved that this past year, going out and driving, the Rolex 24 and being involved. I think that we're starting to see, in fact, more NASCAR drivers, in fact, involved in all those races, especially the endurance events, because of the fact that they've gotten better at road course racing. And I am glad to see them back. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying I want to see, for example, Boris Said return to NASCAR for the 60th time just to, come race at whatever new road course NASCAR comes up with. But at the same time, it is cool to have those guys kind of back because you don't know what to expect. In that regard, you're going to see, a bunch of underfunded teams towards the top 20. But I guess I asked this question to you because the way you look at it is, yes, there's a lot of, especially in the Xfinity side, a lot of road course ringers that have come back for these races. But do we think this may be the last time, or I shouldn't say this will be the last time, but do we think that we'll ever see another road course ringer show up, with the exception of A.J. Allmendinger, and actually win a NASCAR race in any of the 3 premier series based upon how much the sport has changed over the last 5 years?
It's tough because the precedent is not looking too good, because when you looked at the truck series, there were a lot of these guys that had never run a road course before, like Christian Eckes, that ran really well throughout the race. So these younger guys have kind of gotten into road courses. It's not like the old days where you'd see these guys who were so good on the ovals and then could barely even make a right turn. So, times are changing, but I'd say there's 2 guys that could possibly be able to steal one other than Allmendinger. We know AJ Allmendinger is going to be excellent on the road courses because guess what? He was a Cup Series driver before, and he had Cup Series speed to once win a Cup race and make the playoffs. But the two guys, I'd say Tagliani in a truck race is due at some point to win one of these road course races. I think the Daytona Road Course might return. We might see two road courses going forwards and trucks with that in Canada, and he'll probably race both for KBM. I think eventually he'll be able to steal one. He's finished second and third on a couple occasions. And then the other guy, Andy Lally, he's looked really good this season. I remember when he used to race in the 71 in the Cup races years ago, but he's back in the Xfinity Series, and he showed top 10 speed in all the races, and especially at a track maybe like a Road America or, if rain came into the picture, him, Pardue, Balicki, they could suddenly come through and try to win a race. But you never know what'll happen at a road course, especially if rain comes into play. So 2 last things to wrap up a long show today. First thing, I got to touch on NASCAR Heat because I saw Lucky Dog won the championship in the Pro League, and he also won the eSpark Championship, which I was broadcasting on Sunday night in that wild finish. I mean, he has just come out of nowhere, and he's really become the face of NASCAR Heat racing.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, I'm real happy for Dan, and congrats to him. That's been a long time coming in regards to getting an NASCAR Heat Pro League championship. I mean, all the work the kids put on, for the past 2 days, and me personally being a friend of him, talking to him every single day. This is all, he's dreamed of in regards to the past, year. Working hard, rebounding the tough season that he had in season 1. And he turned around and, he made it matter. Michigan, he should have been eliminated. Not a lot of people realize he should have been eliminated. He got bailed out because he got a speeding penalty. First green flag pit stop. And he got lucky. A yellow came out in the cycle of the second green flag pit stops, and he suddenly found himself first to the chase drivers. Turned around, got a solid result. Phoenix, he was battling for the lead just right there. But at the track of Bristol, in which Dan thought was his worst track ever, and I mean this personally, he said, I hate this place. I hate coming here, not because of the fact that it's just so tough with the banking, but I hate it because I just find it so tough to be consistent. Yet he qualified well, turns around, and he's competitive right there with the 14 of Brandon Gritton, as well as Justin Brooks, who, to be honest, for most of that race, didn't look like he was the fastest car. It looked like it was the 14 and the 13. But Brooks took the lead. He had Dan right behind. And listen, I know Dan's going to get a lot of flack for that move he made to get around Justin there with, I believe it was 3 to go. But you're racing for $30,000 in a championship. Dan's the kind of kid that doesn't really move anyone viciously, I guess you can say. You could tell he was faster. He had to go. And I'm not condoning bumping and banging, but you got to go when you got to go. You're racing for a championship, and he had to go, and he got the job done. And what we saw on the broadcast, to be honest, I got to see a couple other angles, isn't really what we got to see or what the guys saw on track, so they got to see a different angle. It looked actually a lot cleaner off of what we saw on the broadcast, but overall, congrats to him. And I know he's a little bit upset that he had to move Brooks to get it done, but he shouldn't have to hang his head. You walk away champion, you get what you deserved, and sure, things may be a little bit tougher for you down the road. But, I mean, overall, he's put together one heck of a run, won the eSpark Championship just a week prior on the final corner. I mean, the kid's special. He has the talent, and I'm excited to see what he does coming for Season 3.
Definitely. Let's end it with one thing. Indy 500 Sunday, just instinctively, who's your pick to win?
Well, I can promise you it's probably not the pole sitter. If I'm not mistaken, Marco Andretti is the pole sitter, right? Yeah. That's definitely not my bet, simply because he hasn't won a race in 10 years. But overall, this is a weird week, Eddie, in terms of Indy 500, because Penske has not shown any speed, in my opinion, consistently throughout all the practices and such. And I'm not going to pick a specific winner, but I just feel the week is going so under the radar for Penske that I feel like a Penske car, when it's all said and done, is going to walk away victorious for the first Indy 500 in which Roger Penske owns the racetrack. So my pick is going to be one of the Penske guys overall, but they need to find that speed first and foremost, and they haven't really had it at all throughout the week.
Yeah, Roger Penske would love to see that, but I'm not going with them. I'm going with Ganassi, who's just been so strong this year. I think either car could win, but I'm going to go with Scott Dixon. He had that amazing start to the season where he dominated really the first 3 races, and he's run well in the Indy 500 before. He had a scary crash there back in 2017, but he's ready to go, and I think he's going to get to victory lane at Indianapolis on Sunday. So we will be back on Monday, and then next Thursday we're going to have Zoe Alter back on, where we'll be doing our comprehensive NFL season preview. You will not want to miss that, but we will be back on Monday for our next episode. Until next time, I'm Eddie Kalegi.
And I'm Tim Moore.
This is Sports Speak.